Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LO3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy Mango, South Florida, and today's date, Sunday, December 12th, 2020. Yes, and of course tomorrow will be the meeting of the Electoral College for all the states, electors and all that, to do their discussion, vote, etc. And of course, it will go on to transferring all that good stuff to January 6th. Of course, you're going to hear the mainstream media going to be talking about the hype and hoopla and all that. So don't even sweat it. And read the decision to deny the Texas lawsuit. I did them last episode. You could look that up. The memo and all that's all there. So, without further ado, I'm going to be mainly talk about a little history lesson here about economics. And this one here came from the American Institute for Economic Research. And this one's entitled, Why Hayek Was Right About Nazis Being Socialists. It's written by Richard M. Embeline. And it actually came out December 8th, a few days ago. But it's an interesting little read here. So I'm going to proceed. Words are powerful things in that they enable to share us a common world of understanding with our contemporaries and in the written form with generations long past. But too often, words can just easily cause confusion, misunderstanding, and conflict among the people in any society. One such word that keeps causing this type of confusion and conflict is socialism. What does it mean? What does it mean? What forms has it taken? And why does it generate so much intellectual heat rather than light? It has come up again in a recent article by Richard J. Granieri, who is research director of the Lauder Institute at the University of Pennsylvania, on why the right needs to stop falsely claiming that Nazis were socialist. That was on Washington Post, December 5th, 2020. Denying that National Socialism was socialist, he sees with frustration that those he calls the political right attempt to classify the German Nazi regime of the 1930s and 40s as socialist. Yes, the formal name of the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But in his view, while Nazis did impose an extensive degree of government intervention and control over the private sector, their socialism was at best secondary element in their appeal. Some prominent Nazis may have played to the working class resentments, with the hope of attracting people away from the communists and the democratic socialists through appeals to anti-Jewish sentiments, but there was no directed and consistent challenge against private property. Rather than controlling the means of production or redistribution wealth, to build a utopian society, the Nazis focused on safeguarding a social and racial hierarchy. They promised solidarity for members of the Volksgemeinschaft, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, racial community, that means, even as they only deny rights to those outside the charmed circle. Granieri argues. The Nazis mostly pandered to small businessmen and artisans, and others in the middle class who feared and disliked communism and socialism, and they were not anchored into any advocacy and belief in democracy. To the contrary, what was Nazism all about then? Granieri says, National Socialism preserved private property while also putting the entire resources of society at the service of an expansionist and racist national vision, which included the conquest and murderous subjugation of other peoples. The Nazi regime, therefore, cannot be considered to be socialist because National Socialism was not interested in controlling the means of production or redistribution of wealth to build an egalitarian utopia. Guarneri does admit that the Soviet Union had entered into an alliance of convenience with Nazi Germany between 1939 and 1941 to divide up Eastern Europe between them. But with Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the remainder of the war because he struggled between them of mutual annihilation. So that 2-year period of Soviet-Nazi friendship does not demonstrate any commonality between socialism and not National Socialism. Hayek's misplaced views on socialism and Nazism. Guarneri also takes a swipe at the Austrian economist and Nobel Peace Prize winner Friedrich A. Hayek for attempting to put the socialist label on Nazism in his book The Road to Serfdom. It came out in 1944. Hayek was appalled by the rise of economic planning in any democratic states. Embodied by Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, Hayek warned that any government intervention in the market eroded freedom, eventually leading to some form of dictatorship, Guarneri claims. Hayek was enormously influential, he says, on both Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and Hayek's assertion that all government interventions in the economy led to totalitarianism continues to animate popular works that warned of the genocidal dangers of implementing as a welfare state. Ronnie Guarneri would rather drop all of his distracting labeling controversy and search for ways for protecting citizens against the negative exigencies of the market, focusing instead on a proper balance of interest within a democratic political party. Depending on the measurement of results from introducing and implementing various types of interventionist and redistributive policies. He also wants rightists to drop harping on 20th century American progressives for heralded and advocated eugenics as a means of designing superior human types. But wait, were they not simply following the science as widely understood and accepted at the time? Many socialism in the house of collectivism. To begin, in the house of collectivism, have been many socialist mansions among early 19th century French socialists. There was diversity of views as to whether the socialist society to come, for instance, would be an industrial or agrarian paradise. There were disagreements about whether people could reason their way into radical social change. Those whom Marx labeled the utopian socialist, or whether it would come only in its own good time due to inescapable historical evolution and revolution, as Marx insisted. The first socialist party to seriously move towards political influence in the second half of the 19th century was the German Democratic Socialists, who shunned the call for violent revolution and amassed a growing number of votes in electing their candidates to the Imperial German Parliament by pursuing power through the ballot box. This frightened the German powers that to be so, besides attempting for a while to suppress the German Socialist Party. Otto von Bismarck, a chancellor of the German Empire in the 1870s and 1880s, introduced all the major component elements of the modern welfare state, as well as interventionist regulations over parts of the German industry and trade. Bismarck's brand soon was labeled state socialism, or sometimes monarchical socialism. As the Chancellor said to a British admirer, William H. Dawson, my idea was to bribe the working class, or shall I say, to win them over to regard the state as a social institution existing for their sake and interest in their welfare. As Dawson explained, what Imperial Germany seemed to have found in state socialism was a middle ground between an individualism that would allow the state to do nothing and an extreme radical socialism that would have the state do everything. Further to the east in Europe, more doctrinaire Marxian socialists and Imperial Russia rejected the nice ties of elections and legislative welfare state reforms. Only violent revolution could break the capitalist hold on the exploited masses. As Lenin came to insist dictatorship of the proletariat once in power. This resulted in schism between democratic and dictatorial socialists for the good part of the 20th century. But it should be kept in mind, while these two groups of socialists denounced each other over the means of coming to power, well into the second half of the 20th century, they almost all agreed on a desired end: the abolition of private ownership of the means of production and the introduction of central planning. Hey, like, same crap, different package, right? Absolutely. Paternalistic expediency from cradle to grave. From these forms of socialism, Guarneri desires for a democratic balancing of interests based on the expediency of what works. Bismarck state socialism seems the closest to what he is looking for. As William Dawson expressed in it, Bismarck and State Socialism 1891, no department of economic activity should on principle be close to the state. The state socialists say that this must be determined by expediency and by circumstances of time and place. It was state socialism in which, as an American admirer of the German system, Friedrich Howe expressed in his book on Socialized Germany 1915, the state has its finger on the pulse of the worker from the cradle to the grave. His education, his health, his working efficiency, and are matters of constant concern. And if this all seems too paternalistic, Howe said, this paternalism does not necessarily mean less freedom to the individual than that which prevails in America or England. It is rather different kind of freedom of social welfare guarantees. Howe later served in FDR's New Deal Agricultural Adjustment Administration, or they call it AAA, that attempted to plan the output of American farming. See my article, America's Progressives Are Bismarck's Grandchildren. I love it. It's nothing new at all, folks. National Socialism's master race egalitarianism. But did any of these socialisms have anything to do with the nature and content of what became the National Socialist ideology and actual policies? Guarneri insists that National Socialism cannot be socialist because it did not pursue a utopian idea for greater equality for all as a whole. But this presumes that not only legitimate utopian dream and therefore benchmark for labeling something socialist is the one that Guarneri considers good and right. In fact, the Nazis had the utopian vision for the future. It began with their notion of German race purity, on the basis of which they rejected the older Prussian idea of aristocratic and class hierarchy. All real Germans were equal and were to be given opportunities for education, occupational, and professional advancement as the means by which they could make their contribution to the high good of the German people as a whole. That Nazi egalitarianism was limited only to those real Germans possessing the racial characteristics that guide their ideological thinking, with Jews classified as the lowest and most treacherous of race enemies, does not change the fact that they too were utopians with social equality goals, but only for those within the in-group. This was nothing but a variation of the Marxist theme that the world is divided into irreconcilable social classes, with the capitalists being inescapable class enemies of the workers. And as the Soviet practice, they and their children were stripped of all rights and opportunities and made into permanent pariahs to be re-educated to serve the building of socialism or liquidate it. It may be a notion of a utopia that both Granary and I would reject, but for many in the Nazi leadership and among the wider German population at the time, it was believed in and worked for, no matter reprehensible it may seem to others. Certainly today, when we all know what its outcome was in full practice. This is what made it a national socialism rather than international socialism. It's called an appeal word to a segment of humanity defined by asserted racial characteristics, rather than a call for all workers of the world to unite regardless of who or where. And in retrospect, this meant that National Socialism could never have a following great enough to conquer and control the world, since its pool of members was definitionally too limited a number of all mankind. Most of the world's population had defined itself in conflict with Nazism precisely due to its race-based exclusivity. Interesting there, right? Of course, socialism, nationalism, and the race. But was National Socialism not only anti-capitalist, but socialist in some reasonable understanding? It would be possible to draw upon any number of Nazi sources to determine and decide whether National Socialism was a form of real socialism. In 1936, Nazi educator Friedrich Alfred Beck said in the Education in the Third Reich, a text meant as a guide for German teachers around the country. As it reads here, National Socialism has restored the concept of a people from its modern shallowness. By people, we understand an entire living body which is racially uniform, in which is held together by common history, common fate, a common mission, and common task. Education, from the standpoint of race and people, is the creation of a form of life in which the racial unity will be preserved through the totality of the people. Socialism is a direction of personal life through dependence on the community, consciousness of the community. Nationalism is the elevation of individual life to a unique, microcosmic expression of the community in the unity of the personality. It's translated in National Socialism. That's the U.S. Department of State, 1943, page 28. I know I said that. Why not? The individual lives through the community and race and nation defined to which community and individual owes. His allegiance, rather than social classes, nationalism classifies people by race, category. This makes you who you are and provides meaning to your life in the Nazi worldview. National Socialism's anti-capitalism and socialism. But what about National Socialist economics? Let's take a look at Gustav Stolper's German economy from 1870 to 1940. Stolper was the longtime editor of the German economic magazine, oriented toward a classical liberal viewpoint. He was forced to leave Germany with Hitler's rise to power due to his politics and his Jewish family background, and found refuge in the United States. Stolper explained some of the socialist papers to Nazi ideology and policy. The National Socialist Party was from the outset of a capitalist party as much it was fighting and in competition with Marxism. National Socialism wooed the masses from three angles. The first angle was the moral principle of the second, financial system. The third, the issue of ownership. The moral principle was commonwealth before self-interest. The financial promise was breaking bondage of interest slavery. The industrial program was nationalization of all big and corporate business. Trust. By accepting the principle, the commonwealth before self-interest, National Socialism simply emphasizes its antagonism to the spirit of a competitive society as represented supposedly by democratic capitalism. But to the Nazis, this principle means also the complete subordination of the individual to the exigencies of the state. And in this sense, National Socialism is unquestionably a socialist system. If some people get offended, who the hell cares, right? The nationalization of big industry was never attempted after the Nazis came to power, but this was by no means a betrayal of their program, as has been alleged by some of their opponents. The socialization of the entire German productive machinery, both agricultural and industrial, was achieved by methods other than expropriation to a much larger extent and on an immeasurably more comprehensive scale than the authors of the party program in 1920 probably ever imagined. In fact, not only big trusts were gradually but rapidly subjected to government control in Germany, but was so every sort of economic activity, leaving not much more than the title of private ownership. All right, so it says here, German businessmen reduced to enterprise chart managers. This is by Garner Reitman in The Vampire Economy, Doing Business Under Fascism, 1939, highlighted that while most of the means of production has not been nationalized, they had nonetheless been politicized and collectivized under an intricate web of Nazi planning targets, price and wage regulations, production rules and quotas, and strict limits and restraints on the action and decisions of those who remained nominally, the owners of private enterprise throughout the country. Every German businessman knew that his conduct was prescribed and positioned within the wider planning goals of the National Socialist regime, not much differently than the state factory managers in the Soviet Union seen at the time under Stalin. The German owners of private enterprises were given wide discretion in the day-to-day management of the enterprises that nominally remained in their possession. But Nazi planning agencies set output targets determine input supplies and allocations, determine wage and work condition rules, and dictate the availability of investment funds and the rate of interest that they could be obtained through the banking system, along with strict central control and direction of all import and export trade. The Nazi idea of a socialist welfare state for all real Germans, but more generally approaching Ronald Greneri's denial of National Socialism being a socialist system, we can turn to a more recent historian of the Nazi regime, that being Goetz Ali, and Hitler's beneficiaries, plunder, racial war, and the Nazi warfare state. Ali focuses on the socialist aspect of National Socialism so as to better understand the Nazi regime as a kind of racist, totalitarian welfare state. Ali emphasizes that the ideology and practice of the Nazi regime were in fact deeply socialist. Within Germany, among the German people of pure Aryan blood, the idea was an egalitarian social order in which every German would be freed from traditional class barriers so that he might have the opportunity to rise up to any level of success in serving the fatherland. The welfare state policies begun by Bismarck in the late 19th century Imperial Germany were viewed by the Nazis as a prelude to a complete guarantee of quality standard of living for all real Germans that would be patternistically provided by the National Socialist state. The problem was that the promises of the welfare state could not be fulfilled within Germany's 1933 borders. If the German people were to have this material paradise on earth, someone will have to supply the manpower and the resources to provide the means for the massive redistribution of wealth. Elliot points out that before and during World War II, the German capitalist class was made to be paid its fair share for the benefit of the rest of the German people. Taxes were proportionally far higher on the rich in Germany than the rest of the population. Okay, you're saying taxing the rich? So you ask people this, oh, you want to support the Hitler's ideology? Hey, man, people have a cap, So, Germany then, the rest of the population, I'll talk about that. During the war, the government established mandatory overtime pay in all industries and imposed wage increase to keep the masses loyal to the regime, all at the expense of German business. At the same time, German industry worked under government commanded during a 4-year plan from 1936 until the end of the war in 1945. Plunder policy to fund the National Socialist welfare state. But it was only after the war started that the machine was redistributive plunder was really set into motion. Every country overrun by the German army not only had to pay the cost of the occupation, but also was systematically looted for the benefit of the German population as a whole. Both within Germany and around the rest of Europe, the great enemy that the Nazis were determined to eliminate were the Jews. Before the war, the regime had attempted to pressure German Jews to leave the country. After the war began, the government was determined to expel all Jews in Western and Central Europe to the east. Finally, the solution to the Jewish problem was found in concentration and death camps. But beginning in 1941 and 1942, the expelling of Jews from Germany and the rest of the occupied Europe was accelerated as part of the Nazi welfare state. When Great Britain began to bomb German cities, at first thousands and then tens of thousands of Germans found themselves homeless. with all their belongings destroyed. Municipal government, with the approval of the Nazi leadership in Berlin, began to confiscate Jewish houses and apartments, including the contents, to make room for racially pure Germans needing new places to live. In every occupied country, the Nazis initiated similar confiscatory policies with local accomplices with whom they shared looted Jewish property. Only in Belgium and Denmark did large segments of the population and the bureaucracy resist participating in the plunders of the Jews. The Nazi first nationalized Jewish property and then distributed it to those worthy among the Germans or occupied populations. Needy Germans provided for by redistributing from other Europeans. Hundreds of trainloads of stolen Jewish property were either given away or sold at discounted prices in German cities, large and small, throughout the war. Ali estimates that because of this looted property and the goods sent back to Germany by soldiers, many, if not most, Germans enjoy a more comfortable standard of living throughout the most of the war than the civilian population in Great Britain. What also fed a large part of this Nazi plunderland was the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. In the East, Hitler wished to show none of the minimal niceties with which the people of Western Europe were treated. The vast and rich lands of Russia and Ukraine were to become the economic promised land in the Nazis' dreams of the future. Under the plan, at least 20 million Russian peasants would be worked and starved to death in the countryside after a German victory to make room for a huge German resettlement that would provide the living space for the Aryan race. The cities of Moscow and Leningrad were to be razed, their population left to die. A vast majority of German families continued to feast, even under the Allied bombings, thanks to the locust-like seizure of anything and everything across occupied Europe. Ali estimates that during the 5.5 years of war, the Nazis plundered $2 trillion worth of property, goods, and wealth from the peoples of Europe. A large sum by any standard, but only huge considering the much lower levels of output and income in Europe during those war years. No doubt the summary of the content of Ali's analysis of the National Socialist welfare system and its version of central planning would convince Ronald Graneri even more that the Nazi regime should not be classified as a socialist. Hayek was right. Nazis were socialist planners too. But in my view, it demonstrates that all of its characteristics find their family resemblance in a socialist regime. Institutionally, the starting premise is the individual is little or nothing, and the most view himself as a dependent upon for working for a wider common good, other than his own personal self-interest. In the name of the people, those in political authority, rather in that position, through votes and violence, establish in the name of the people, the hierarchy of social goals, purposes, and collective ends for which a set of government planning policies, interventions, and welfare redistributions will be set in motion. Individual choice and decision-making as consumers and producers are significantly reduced or even totally eliminated with government central planning and decision-making replacing voluntary associations and exchange through the competitiveness processes of supply and demand. Price and production no longer fully reflect the valuations and appraisement of the multitudes of interacting buyers and sellers in the society. which means all of us in our consumption and production roles in the social system of division of labor. Instead, government plans and interventions determine or heavily influence wages and prices along what gets produced and how much, which means everything concerning our personal lives, livelihoods, and standards of living. In other words, extensive and intrusive government regulations, restrictions, redistributions, and opposed centralized plans demonstrate what Frederick A. Hayek was arguing over 35 years ago in The Road of Serfdom, that more government command and control replaces market-based choices, decisions, and opportunities, the less freedom we have over increasing corners and aspects of our lives. Like many others over more than 100 last year, Ronald Graneri may very well poo-poo this because he may not consider some loss of personal liberty something too much to spare when it's replaced with compulsory political paternalism that guarantees various material wants for some that he considers more important than a degree of freedom foregone by others. But I would ask him at least admit that this is freedom lost for the coerced security for which have some had to be plundered, that is, have part of the income and wealth that was theirs taken from them without their voluntary consent. It is still a compulsory taking, whether done by the voting majority or dictatorial elite. And I would further ask him to concede that whether he agrees with the ends and goals of other socialists, their use of command and control, and their introduction for some form of institutional central planning to pursue their declared social good, make their system as much as a socialist or one as any other than Ronald Graneri might endorse or look more favorably upon. So whether he likes it or not, the Nazis too were socialists, just a different stripe than the ones he feels more comfortable with. That's pretty cool. I like that a lot. So, I get a big kick out of it. Like this, folks. They're all the same, but with a different name, different motive, like different stripes, but they all are equally totalitarianism, tyrannical. Government knows best. So, if Black Lives Matter goes after Nazis, go, hey, how come you're contradicting yourself? Because you're pro-big government as well. Antifa, all that. They're all the same, folks. So, that's how I look at it. If you don't like it, who the hell cares? It's been going on for a very long time. Remember, socialist organizations have their infighting too. They have their battles, including in Venezuela and other places. So always look at the bigger picture. And that would be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please share your correspondence with Decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave this footnote on this article on my speaker page. If you want to contact me, you can hit me at LookYouLuck3@gmail.com or LookYouLuck03@protonmail.com. And I say encourage support American Institute for Economic Research. If you want to send them some donation, that'd be great. If you want to throw me some, connect me at paypal.me/LookYouLuck3. Once again, thank you for your time. Please always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.